Hey everyone, welcome to another Let's Build a Guitar Pedal video. In this one we're going to be looking at we're going to be building the Oil Tanker Fuzz. So this is the first stage of the build. We'll be putting the components into the PCB and hearing at the end what the actual build sounds like. So just like we did in the last video, work through the build doc and install the components as the build doc suggests. So we start with the resistors first. Well, I start with the resistors first. Just like so. This project's very simple. There's nothing too complicated about it. There's not many components, so there's not much room for error as well. It's very simple. So that's the resistors done. Next I'm going to do the sockets for the two transistors. So you use these single inline sockets as they're called, and you just cut off 3 for each of the transistors and solder them in. As simple as that. And we'll put the transistors in before we'll put the transistors in at the end of when we finish the build, or we'll forget and test the pedal and wonder why it doesn't work. So the next thing to do is the capacitors. 2 types of capacitors on this build. They're very common. One is a box type or a film type, but the one I'm using here is box, and the other is electrolytic, which looks like these little cans. These are obviously polarized. Just make sure you put them in the right way around. The long lead is positive and the short lead is negative, and it says on the board which one, if I can get it in view, which one is the plus. You can see the little plus sign on the top of the component silk screen on the top there. So that's the capacitors. Just remember also when you put them in to double check the values before you actually commit to soldering. It's just easier than having to desolder things from plated through holes, because they can be a little bit tricky. So also you might be seeing, if this is the first pedal build that you've seen, the first pedal you've seen someone build, you're probably noticing that it's not that complicated. You don't need to be an electronics genius to work this stuff out. If you just follow the build doc, follow the values, and take your time and do it properly, you shouldn't have too many problems. Fingers crossed. So now let's get rid of this diode. That's probably the next thing on the list down the bottom there. That's for reverse polarity protection. So if you plug the polarity of your power supply in the wrong way, you won't damage the pedal. And this is another polarized component, so that means that you need to put the band on the diode in the correct way. It needs to go in the PCB the correct way. You can see there's a band on the, you might be able to see on there, D1, there's a band on the side, so the band on the diode needs to go correctly into the band, correctly into the pads, so that the band's on the right side, if that makes sense. So just bend your leads down. I use a duckbill pair of pliers. It's a very minor detail. You don't need to use these for this, but for lead forming of through-hole components, I use duckbill, because as you can see, the duckbill gets nice and close to the component, whereas if you use rounded nose, they don't tend to get that close, and they're not quite as accurate. Very minor detail, something that you get used to, so that you might do if you build a lot of pedals. It might be a little detail that you'll notice yourself, but don't stress over it. If it's one of your first pedals, just use any pliers are fine. So let's solder him in. But before we solder him in, we make sure that we've put it in around the right way, because if that diode goes in the wrong way, the pedal won't even work, and it is in the right way. So now we'll do the 2 MOSFETs, the 2 power MOSFETs on the end. You just solder them straight in, and again, they are polarized. You have to make sure they're in the right way. The good thing about this layout though, obviously with the silk screen, is it shows you which side the heatsink is on. So as you can see, that white bar across the back is the heatsink. So I just noticed all this room at the top here and was sort of just asking myself, I wonder if Eric actually meant to design that on purpose so that you can lie the MOSFETs flat. That's not going to do any harm, lying them flat, and it's going to give me a lot more clearance once I put it inside the pedal. As you can see, if they're sticking up, they take up quite a bit of room. So I'm just going to lie those flat. I don't see any harm in doing that. I'm not sure if Eric designed that on purpose or not. I'll leave a comment. I've actually asked him the question. I've sent him a message just to say, is that actually what you meant to do? And I'll leave a comment on the video if it's yes or no. But I don't see any harm in doing that. So let's just lie them flat like that. And snip off the leads off the back as they fly all over the room. So that's it for that part. Now the only thing we need to do is put the potentiometers in and the wires across the bottom. So once again, make sure you put the right value into the right hole of the PCB. So for this project, we've got a 500K log, a 1K linear and a 10K linear. You can tell log from linear because it has B, and B is linear and A is log. So just make sure you put those in the right hole. You can tell which potentiometer goes where because Eric has written the well, it's actually got the potentiometer number on the bottom there, and it's got the label as well, so volume, tone and fuzz. So Eric doesn't use these backs, and to be honest, they just take up extra room because three potentiometers in a row on a 1590B will probably be a little bit tight, so I'm going to take those off. I find these pliers with the little grippy teeth on it, oh sorry, they're not pliers, wire cutters with these little grippy teeth, wire strippers with these little grippy teeth at the top are really good for taking off those pot backs. You might sort of think that that's a useless tip, but I tell you what, they are actually really hard to get off, particularly if you try and use, well, something like that's not going to work because these Iram pliers don't open that far because they've got springs to automatically return back to open position, so they don't work. But other needle nose pliers, scissors, you know, they're just really hard to get off with that sort of stuff. So if you've got a pair of those around, I recommend using those for that. And of course, as I said last time, you need to protect the backs of the potentiometers now because they're exposed, the metal, and I'm pretty sure the metal of the, well, you don't want the metal back of the potentiometer touching anything on the back of the PCB because it's going to be touching ground. It's going to be touching the enclosure, which is ground, so you'll be shorting out everything on the back of the PCB, so you have to protect it. You don't actually need to take off that backing of the double-sided tape. You can just leave it on if you want, but I was just thinking now it might actually be easier if I do because it'll hold the potentiometers in place as I solder them, which is not something that I normally do, but let's give it a shot for this one. If I can actually get the back of the tape off. That was so ridiculously hard to get that back off, it was ridiculous. But yeah, I got there in the end. I usually use 3M double-sided tape. It's really good stuff. This is some cheap stuff that I've picked up somewhere and it's just not quite as good. But taking the back off that is still fine. The potentiometer still won't make contact with what's underneath it. It should be okay, except if I haven't actually covered the entire back of the potentiometer. I just saw there was actually a connection. In fact, I'm going to do 2 rows of that because I can see they're still making connections underneath. Really important part this stage. You'll end up with all sorts of strange problems if you don't do this properly. So it's absolutely frustrating trying to get that backing tape off, so I'm just going to leave it on. It's still doing the same job, and I'll just blue tack it down in place as I'm soldering it. So that's the potentiometers. They're all lined up in the correct holes, so they're ready to go. So let's solder them in. And as I mentioned in the last Let's Build a Guitar Pedal video, on the potentiometers and the wire, they're the only ones that you actually solder through the top, on the top side of the board, as you're seeing me do right now. You don't have to clip off those pins if you don't want to, they're not harming anybody, so you can just leave them on, which is what I'm going to do. Just going to trim off that tape now that they're in place. And the last thing to do is to put the 4 wires through the 4 holes. There's no particular convention for this. You can do whatever you like, as long as you just remember what you've used for what. So often black is for ground, so I mean we can probably do that. I often use blue for input, so I'll do that. yellow for output, and red for +9 volts. So that's the first stage pretty much done. Just a couple of little things we need to finish before we move on. I'll just trim these back a bit because they're a bit long. That's plenty. You shouldn't really need much more than that. I always think one single strand of wire doesn't need to be longer than the enclosure that you're using. Slightly longer than the enclosure that you're using. If you measure it roughly like that, then you'll know you have enough length on the wire, if that makes sense. Yeah, just a couple of little things we need to finish off. So the transistors aren't obviously populated, so I'm going to put them in now. One of them is I'm just looking at the build doc, a 2N5088, and of course I have tons of those. It's a very common transistor. So again, just make sure you put this in around the right way, and you have to bend out those leads. Sorry, I should show you what I'm doing here. Just bend the leads out because the spacing, the pitch of the leads, when they're close together like they were, won't fit directly into a socket. The pitch on the sockets is wider. So 2N5088 goes into Q1. So just make sure you put it the right way around. Follow the silk screen, the picture on the silk screen, which I'll show you in just one sec once I get this thing in. So the transistor is a particular shape. You can see, hopefully you can see that it's got a rounded back, and on the silk screen there's a picture of the transistor with a rounded back. So just make sure you line it up the right way around. And then the other transistor is a BS107, which is the transistor that's used, sorry, the MOSFET, which is used in the super hard-on. And that goes into the other position, which is Q2. And obviously you can just double check those component labels on the build doc. So that is pretty much it. I'm going to do one final thing before we can hear it, what it sounds like. First, you've got to strip a bit of the end off the wire. So that's that done. So this is an optional thing, you don't have to do it, but if you want to increase the reliability of your effect exponentially, I suggest that you put some hot glue across the back of where the wires are. Once you start moving those wires around back and forwards, they snap very easily. It doesn't matter how thick you go with your wire, they will snap. So if you just add a bit of glue or a whole heap, hot glue gun, it will hold them in place. I need another stick because I've run out. So it just adds a bit of structural support to the wires so they don't snap, and you don't have to re-solder one of the wires, which is a bit of a pain to do, particularly if you've already put it inside the enclosure and you've gone through to the next step. I've done that a few times and it's a bit frustrating. You've got to pull everything out again. So anyway, that's that. Let's actually have a listen to it now. So being a live build, there's absolutely no pre-testing of this effect. I'm plugging it straight in. If there's something wrong with it, we'll go through the process of working out what is actually wrong with it. You can't expect every build to work first shot. Something this simple, I hope that it works first shot. I'm pretty confident that it probably will. But if it's, if you're not familiar with building pedals, or it's one of your first pedals, don't get too upset if it doesn't work when you plug it in. It's a common thing that happens to even builders with experience like me, particularly if I'm doing a more advanced build. You almost expect there will be a problem when you plug it in, and that you have to fix it. So it's just all sort of part and parcel of the hobby. So Eric got back to me and he did confirm that those transistors, the power MOSFETs, are supposed to be laid down like that. So that was a good guess on my part, although it seemed pretty logical. And also this effect is meant to be used on a bass, although it's not limited to a bass. You can use it on guitar. It may sound better on bass, I don't know. I've never used something like this before. And also remember, if you're becoming a guitar pedal builder, your guitar is meant to be out of tune. You no longer have time to tune your guitar. There's a good chance that my guitar is out of tune as well. Let's have a listen to it. So it's all plugged up, and the volume is on. So remember, before you turn up the volume on the effect, make sure that the volume on the effect is down. That was actually up a bit, and then just put a tiny bit of volume on, because you don't know how loud it's going to be through your amp when you actually turn it on. That's obviously not loud enough. that's the tone controls in the middle, volume and fuzz. Fuzz is up full. Actually sounds pretty cool on low gain as well. Let's just crank it up a bit so we can hear it. Bit too woolly on that. So whenever I'm building a guitar pedal based on a fuzz face, I always have a preconception of what I think it's going to sound like, and that actually sounded like nothing like I was expecting. It was a lot more refined, and it sounded really good. My hat's off to Eric for this one. Sounds awesome for a simple fuzz face type effect. It's obviously a heavily modified fuzz face, which is probably why it sounds the way it does. But yeah, it just sounded more refined than I was expecting. And I say refined in a good way. I know there's different types of fuzz. There's gritty and dirty fuzz, and there's refined fuzz. I think this sounds like a really good refined fuzz, in my opinion. I'm not sure if you actually can. We're hearing the same thing through the camera as I'm hearing through the amp, but it sounded really good. And I think if I had a little bit more time to EQ that, I could make that sound awesome. So that's it for this one. If you need the PCB, they're on www.diyguitarpedals.com.au. You can order them there. There's probably going to be a stage 2 to these Let's Build a Guitar Pedal video where I actually put those inside an enclosure, because obviously if you stomp on that right now, you'll break it. And yeah, that's it for this one though. Hope you like it. Leave your comments below, and thanks for watching. See you guys.